Here with reaction is Congressman Jim Banks, and the House GOP Conference Chair Elise is with us. Congressman, let me start with you. You and Jim Jordan originally were slated to be on this committee. How come they took you off this committee?
Well, first of all, Sean, what you heard tonight in this committee hearing is that the entire point behind this process is to prosecute Donald Trump for crimes that he did not commit. We all know this is a sham committee process. They want to put Donald Trump in jail. If they don't get that, they settle to keep his name off the ballot. It's not about investigating January 6th. If I was the ranking member and I was in that room tonight, we would have been asking questions about the bombshell reporting of John Solomon, who, by the way, has done more to investigate January 6th than anyone on that committee has. The breakdown of security, how intelligence was gathered, how it was disseminated, why Capitol Police officers, like the head of the Capitol Police Union, told me that the rank-and-file Capitol Police officers didn't receive the intelligence that something was going to happen that day. And now we know, thanks to John Solomon and you, that Chuck Schumer's office got that intelligence, but our Capitol Police officers didn't. At the end of the day, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is covering up her roles and responsibilities, her breakdown of leadership as the head of the Capitol security, her leadership and oversight over the Capitol Police. This is all a cover-up to divert us from focusing on that and making it a political witch hunt about Donald Trump instead.
If they had any integrity, they would call her up, get her text messages, get her emails. They do the same with Schumer. They do the same with Muriel Bowser. They do the same with the House Sergeant of Arms and the Senate Sergeant of Arms. They're not doing any of that. And they would bring in the Capitol Police Chief, who also requested the guard be called up. Congresswoman, does it make any sense to you, beyond being dull, boring, repetitive, and a preview of 100 more hearings to come, the one thing they're not asking is, how does it make any sense if Donald Trump authorized up to 20,000 National Guard troops to protect the Capitol? How does it make sense that they are there on national television blaming Donald Trump for wanting to start an insurrection? Can you explain that logic to me?
It makes no sense at all, Sean, because this is a partisan witch hunt. It has been that from the beginning. This is about punishing Nancy Pelosi's political opponents. That's why Nancy Pelosi removed Jim Banks and Jim Jordan, because they were asking the very important questions that you laid out today. Why was the Capitol left so ill-prepared on January 6th? Why did Nancy Pelosi prioritize her own partisan political optics rather than providing the security, the training, the equipment, and basically making sure that there was broader understanding of the threats that potentially were going to happen on January 6th. And you know what, Sean? The issues that matter to the American people right now that I hear about from my constituents: inflation, sky-high gas prices, the border crisis, the baby formula shortage. That's what the American people care about. And Democrats know that they are losing on all of those issues because they've created their crises, their radical policies. So these hearings are no more than an attempt to change the narrative. They are desperate. This is an illegitimate committee that is unconstitutional, and it will do nothing to ensure that the Capitol is more secure in the future.
Let's talk, Congressman, a little bit about the security failures here. And they also talk about the fact that the president had issues with the election. I can give you some examples that we really need to resolve going into any future election. For example, many states have laws that say that partisan observers get to watch the vote count up close from start to finish. That didn't happen in any state that had those laws. That's problematic if you want integrity in your elections. That's problematic if you want confidence in the results. I'll take the state of Pennsylvania, for example. They have a constitution in that state with very specific guidelines about mail-in balloting. Well, instead of going for a constitutional amendment, they decided to pass legislation, which is a lot easier to do. That's problematic if you believe in the rule of law, if you believe in a state constitution. You should follow the process. So there were legitimate questions that a lot of people were asking. There were other people saying crazy stuff, but these issues in particular, if you read the decision by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, it was a 3-4 decision. The dissent was a stinging one by the Supreme Court Chief Justice in Wisconsin, saying you're not following the laws of this state. I think we should pay attention a little bit to what he's saying. He criticized the other 4 members on the court that didn't vote with him, but they lost that decision 3-4. It was a very close vote. So there were issues, legitimate concerns. We had people that signed affidavits under the threat of perjury. Nobody wanted to hear from those whistleblowers, did they?
No, Sean. And never forget, by the way, that Benny Thompson voted to object to the election in 2004. I don't call him an insurrectionist. I just call him a hypocrite. Because now here we are today with him changing his tune about what that means. I had big concerns about the election in 2020, and I voted to object as well, because those states that unconstitutionally conducted their elections deserved the scrutiny that they received through that process. People were right to be upset about how the election was conducted. That doesn't mean that they committed an insurrection. Again, they're trying to prosecute Donald Trump for crimes that happened on that day that he didn't commit. People that were violent, that broke into the Capitol, they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And the FBI has arrested hundreds of people that have done it. But there was a good reason why people showed up in their nation's capital. By the way, there's no greater place in the world to show up and protest, make your voice heard. It's very American to do that in Washington, D.C. And to prosecute people who did that peacefully, who exercised their constitutional right, is absolutely shameful.
Well, let's talk a little bit, Congresswoman. I mean, so far, it's been a rehash of pretty much everything we already knew. They made a big deal of the fact that they had video that had never been seen before. That seems kind of meaningless to me. We all saw what happened that day, just like we saw the 574 riots in the summer of 2020. I don't know why we don't have a committee looking into that. Good people all across the country know that we can't have riots like that and people go unpunished, but that's exactly what happened. We can't have our Capitol breached like this. There are answers, but it doesn't seem like they're even delving into the question that would lead to the answers.
That's exactly right, Sean. And what makes Republicans different from Democrats is Republicans have consistently condemned violence, whereas Democrats did not condemn the violence during the riots throughout all of 2020, the desecration of our federal buildings, the burning to the ground of our cities across America. Republicans did condemn that, just like we condemned the violence on January 6th. And again, those that committed crimes and destroyed property on the U.S. Capitol, they have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But we have a constitutional duty when there is unconstitutional overreach when it comes to certain electors. I also objected to certain electors because in the case of Pennsylvania, they circumvented the constitutional process. We need stronger election integrity and election security in our country. I know that in my home state of New York, where we don't have adequate election security. We need chain of custody on the ballots. We need signature verification. All of those key issues, it was important to discuss that on the House floor. So the fact that it was not just Benny Thompson who objected in the past, but also Jamie Raskin objected to the Electoral College counting after President Trump's election, and he called for the impeachment of President Trump even prior to Trump's swearing in. So look at the Democrats on this committee. They have no basis. They are complete hypocrites. I agree with my colleague Jim Banks, and they want to avoid, again, focusing on the issues that matter to the American people. But I think the American people are smart. They are tuning this out. They see these individuals for hypocrites and Pelosi parrots that they are.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you. Congressman Banks, thank you. Joining us